I stood at the back of the ballroom, holding my son's hand, watching the man who once promised me forever slide a ring onto another woman's finger. Then his eyes found mine. And in front of 300 guests, the billionaire froze because the toddler beside me had his exact eyes. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or made to feel like you weren't enough for someone's image, stay with me till the end. This story is for you. And if you believe truth always finds its way back, no matter how long it takes, drop a like before we even start because trust me, by the end of this, you're going to need somewhere to put all these feelings. My name is Talia, and 3 years ago I was just a girl from a small apartment with big dreams and a job that barely covered rent. I never imagined my life would end up in headlines, in ballrooms, in rooms where chandeliers cost more than my entire childhood home. But that's exactly where this story takes us. So let me start from the beginning because you need to understand who I was before you understand who I became. I met Xavier at a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday. He wasn't a billionaire then, not yet. He was just a tired man in a wrinkled suit, scribbling numbers on a napkin, trying to build something out of nothing. I brought him his coffee, he made a joke about how bad his handwriting was, and somehow that turned into hours of conversation. He didn't know I existed outside that coffee shop. I didn't know his last name would one day be printed in business magazines. We were just two people talking like the rest of the world didn't matter. Within a year, we were married. It was small, simple, nothing like the parties he throws now. I wore my mother's old earrings because I couldn't afford new ones, and he told me I looked like the only thing in the room worth looking at. I believed him. I believed in us. I believed that love could survive anything, even the kind of success that changes a man faster than he can recognize it happening to himself. And for a while, it did survive. We built a life together while he built his company. I worked 2 jobs so he could focus on his dream, and when his dream finally took off, I thought it would be the reward for everything we'd sacrificed. But success doesn't just change a man's bank account. Sometimes it changes the people standing next to him too, or at least it changes how his family sees those people. His family never approved of me, not once, not even after the wedding. To them, I was a phase, a mistake, someone he'd grow out of once he understood what kind of woman truly belonged at his side. They never said it directly, not in those exact words, but I felt it in every tight smile, every awkward silence at family dinners, every time his mother introduced me as Xavier's wife instead of using my name. I found out I was pregnant the same month his company signed its biggest deal yet. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at that little plus sign, feeling both terrified and the happiest I'd ever been. I thought a baby would bring us closer. I thought it would silence the doubts his family had about me, prove that I wasn't just some woman passing through his life but someone building a future with him. Instead, it seemed to make things worse. The pressure on him doubled. Investors wanted a certain image. His family wanted a certain image, and somewhere in all of that, I started to feel like I didn't fit the picture anymore. Xavier started working longer hours, coming home later, speaking less. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was the company. I told myself a lot of things to avoid facing what was actually happening. We were drifting, and I was the one being left behind. The divorce came faster than I expected and quieter than I deserved. There were lawyers, papers, a prenup I'd signed back when I thought love was the only contract that mattered. His family's lawyer, a sharp man named Mr. Donovan, handled everything with the kind of efficiency that made it clear this wasn't personal to them, it was business. I walked away with almost nothing. No house, no settlement, nothing but my son growing inside me and whatever pride I had left. I never told Xavier I was pregnant before the divorce was finalized. I know how that sounds. I know what you might be thinking right now. But you have to understand, by the time I found the courage to tell him, his family had already painted me as someone who couldn't be trusted, someone after his money, someone who didn't belong in his world. I was scared that if I told him, they'd find a way to take my son from me too, or worse, convince him that the baby wasn't even his. So I stayed quiet, I packed my things, and I left. My son Kai was born 7 months later, in a small hospital room with no family by my side except my best friend Selena, who held my hand through every contraction and every tear. She didn't ask questions, she didn't judge. She just showed up the way real friends do when the world feels like it's falling apart. The 2 years that followed were the hardest of my life, but they were also the years that made me who I am today. I worked as a waitress during the day and cleaned offices at night. I learned how to stretch a dollar further than I ever thought possible. I learned how to comfort a crying baby with nothing but my voice and my arms because that's all I had to give some nights. And through it all, Xavier never called, not once. No support, no check-ins, nothing. It was like Kai and I had simply disappeared from his world the moment the divorce was signed. Selena used to tell me I was the strongest woman she knew, but honestly, most days I didn't feel strong. I felt tired. I felt invisible. I felt like the world had decided my story was over before it even really began. But every night when I looked at my son's face, I found a reason to keep going. He didn't know anything about billionaires or business empires. He just knew his mother's voice, and that was enough motivation to get up every single morning. Selena worked as an event coordinator for one of the most exclusive planning companies in the city, the kind that handles parties for people whose names you'd recognize from magazine covers. One evening, she called me, practically breathless with excitement, telling me she'd landed the biggest contract of her career, decorating an engagement party for a tech billionaire and his fiancée. She didn't mention his name at first. She just talked about the budget, the venue, the kind of opportunity that could change her career forever. It wasn't until she sent me a photo of the invitation that my stomach dropped. There it was, his name, printed in gold lettering like it belonged on a throne instead of a piece of paper. Xavier was getting engaged. And somehow, through a twist of fate I never could have predicted, my best friend was the one organizing the very party meant to celebrate it. Selena offered to back out the moment she realized the connection, but I told her not to. I told her this was her career, her moment, and I wasn't going to let my past get in the way of her future. But then she asked me something that changed everything. She asked if I wanted to come, not as a guest, but to help her oversee the final setup that night since she was short-staffed and trusted me more than anyone else. Part of me wanted to say no immediately. Why would I willingly walk into a room full of people who once looked down on me, who once made me feel small for loving a man who eventually discarded me like I was disposable? But another part of me, a quieter, stronger part, whispered that I had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. I built a life for my son with my own two hands. I survived without anyone's help. Walking into that room wasn't going to make me feel small anymore. If anything, I deserved to walk in with my head held high, so I said yes. And because Selena couldn't find a sitter on such short notice, I brought Kai with me, planning to keep him quietly in a side room with some toys and snacks while I helped with the final touches before the event truly began. The venue was unlike anything I'd ever seen, even after being married to a man who eventually became one of the wealthiest people in the country. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into the architecture itself. Waitstaff moved like silent shadows, carrying trays of food that probably cost more per plate than my monthly rent used to be. Flowers imported from places I couldn't even pronounce decorated every corner of the room. It was beautiful in the way only obscene wealth can be beautiful. I kept to the edges, helping Selena coordinate logistics, checking on table arrangements, making sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. Kai stayed close to me, his small hand wrapped around mine, curious about the lights and the music but mostly just happy to be near his mother. I thought I had everything under control. I thought I could simply blend into the background and disappear before anyone important noticed me. But fate, it seems, had other plans. Guests began arriving, dressed in outfits that probably belonged on runways rather than real life. I recognized a few faces from business magazines, from news segments about Xavier's company's latest achievements. And then, almost like the room itself shifted, I felt his presence before I even saw him. Xavier walked in, more polished than I remembered, more confident in his posture, the kind of confidence that only comes from years of people telling you that you're important. Beside him walked his fiancée, a woman dressed in a gown that probably cost more than everything I owned combined, smiling the kind of smile reserved for cameras and important guests. I tried to stay hidden, tried to keep my focus on the tasks at hand, but Kai, being the curious toddler he was, wandered just a few steps away from me toward the center of the room, drawn by the bright lights of the dessert table. My heart nearly stopped as I rushed to grab his hand, pulling him gently back toward me, but by then it was already too late. Xavier's eyes had found us. I watched the exact moment everything shifted in his expression. At first, confusion, like his mind couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Then recognition, as he realized exactly who I was despite the years that had passed. And then the moment that changed everything, his eyes dropped to Kai, studying his face, his eyes, the shape of his small nose, and I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. He froze, in the middle of his own engagement party surrounded by 300 guests. Photographers and the woman he was about to promise his future to, Xavier, stood completely still staring at a child who looked exactly like him at that age, based on photos his own mother had once shown me during happier times. His fiancée noticed his sudden silence and followed his gaze, her smile faltering as she looked between Xavier, me, and the small boy standing beside me. Confusion crossed her face first, then something sharper, something that looked a lot like suspicion beginning to take root. The room didn't go completely silent, not the dramatic kind of silence you see in movies, but there was a noticeable shift, a ripple of awareness spreading among the guests closest to us. Whispers began, hands covering mouths, eyes darting between Xavier's frozen expression and the woman and child standing several feet away from him. I held Kai a little closer, my heart pounding, but I refused to look away. I refused to shrink. I had spent 2 years building strength I didn't know I had, and I wasn't about to let one frozen moment undo all of that. Xavier finally moved, walking toward us slowly, like a man approaching something he wasn't entirely sure was real. His fiancée followed a few steps behind, her expression now a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Mr. Donovan, his lawyer, hovered nearby, clearly sensing the situation was about to become something far more complicated than a simple party mishap. Talia, Xavier said, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was afraid speaking too loudly might shatter whatever was happening in front of him. Is this? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, let him sit in the discomfort he had once made me feel for 2 long years. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady despite everything inside me shaking. His name is Kai, I said simply. He's 3 years old. The math wasn't hard for anyone paying attention. 3 years old, and our divorce had been finalized just over 3 years ago. Xavier's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, guilt, something that looked dangerously close to grief for time he didn't even know he'd lost. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, and there was real pain in his voice, pain I hadn't expected to hear after everything. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I let myself say the truth out loud. "Because your family made it clear there was no room for me in your world, Xavier, and I wasn't about to let them push my son out too." His fiancée stepped forward then, her voice sharp despite the tremor underneath it. "Is this true? Did you know about this?" "No," Xavier said immediately, turning to her. "Vivian, I swear I had no idea." Vivian's eyes moved between us, searching for something, maybe looking for a lie, maybe looking for confirmation of something she'd always feared but never voiced. The guests around us had stopped pretending not to watch entirely now, the whispers growing louder, phones being lowered after the initial instinct to record had passed, replaced by the simple human curiosity of watching real drama unfold in front of them. Xavier's mother appeared then, pushing through the small crowd, her face pale as she took in the scene before her. The same woman who once looked at me like I was something to be tolerated rather than welcomed now stood frozen, staring at her grandson for the very first time, a child she never knew existed. "You knew," I said quietly, looking directly at her, "didn't you? You knew I was pregnant before the divorce was finalized." Her silence answered the question more clearly than words ever could. Xavier turned to his mother, his expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. "Did you know?" he demanded. "Did you know she was pregnant and you let her walk away without telling me?" His mother's composure finally cracked just slightly. "I did what I thought was best for this family," she said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Best for the family," Xavier repeated, almost laughing, though there was no humor in it. "You mean best for keeping me away from my son?" The party that was supposed to celebrate a new engagement had transformed into something else entirely, something raw and real in a way these polished, perfect events rarely allowed themselves to be. Vivian stood quietly for a long moment, watching everything unfold before finally speaking again, her voice calmer, now more controlled. "I need time to think," she said simply, looking at Xavier. "This isn't something I can just move past in the middle of a party." She slipped the ring off her finger, placed it gently in his palm, and walked away without another word, leaving the room buzzing with whispers that would likely turn into headlines by morning. Xavier didn't chase after her. Instead, he turned back to me and Kai, kneeling slightly so he was closer to eye level with the son he'd never known existed. Kai, ever the curious child, studied him with wide eyes, not understanding the weight of the moment, only sensing that something important was happening. "Can I? Is it okay if I talk to him?" Xavier asked, looking up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine vulnerability in his expression, none of the polished confidence from earlier, just a man realizing how much time he'd lost. I knelt down beside Kai, gently explaining that this was someone important, someone who wanted to know him. Kai, with the simple acceptance only children seem capable of, smiled and said hello, completely unaware that this moment would change the course of both their lives. Over the following weeks, things didn't magically resolve themselves into a fairy tale ending, because real life rarely works that way. Xavier reached out, asking to be part of Kai's life, asking for forgiveness for things he didn't even know he needed to apologize for. His family, the same people who once made me feel unworthy, found themselves having to confront the consequences of decisions they thought they'd buried successfully. I didn't rush back into anything with Xavier. Trust isn't rebuilt in a single conversation, no matter how emotional or sincere. I set boundaries, clear and firm ones, making sure that whatever role he played in Kai's life going forward would be based on consistency and genuine effort, not guilt or sudden obligation. He respected those boundaries, slowly proving through actions rather than empty promises that he genuinely wanted to be present. Selena, despite the chaos that unfolded at what was supposed to be her big career moment, actually ended up gaining more recognition from the event than she ever expected. Sometimes the universe has a strange way of turning our biggest fears into unexpected blessings. As for Vivian, she eventually returned the ring permanently, choosing to walk away from a relationship built on an image rather than honesty. I never saw her again after that night, but I genuinely hope she found whatever peace and happiness she deserved, away from a situation that was never truly hers to navigate. Looking back now, I don't regret the silence I kept all those years ago, because it protected my son during a time when I had no power to protect him any other way. But I'm grateful that truth, no matter how long it takes, eventually finds its way into the light, often in the most unexpected moments in the most unexpected places. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Never let anyone make you feel small for the love you carry, for the family you're building, or for the strength it takes to survive when the world tries to convince you that you don't belong. Sometimes the very people who tried to push you out of the picture end up watching you become the most important part of the story. If this story moved you even a little bit, give it a thumbs up because it genuinely helps more than you'd think. I'd love to know in the comments, do you think Talia made the right choice keeping silent all those years? And if you want to hear more stories like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week, I might just be telling a story that hits even closer to home than this one did.